But I finally got back to Mendocino. I had first come with my lovely first boyfriend, Peter Nash. He brought me to Mendocino. Must have been, I don't know, 65, something like that. Maybe 66, I don't remember. And we splurged and got a room at Byron Randall and Emmylou Packard's bed and breakfast on Main Street for $5 a night. Yeah, and it really did include breakfast, and they were so nice, and their artwork was around, and we went, and anyway, and I just loved it there. And in the similar period of time, my sister had gone to Mendocino with some friends, and then we were talking. Our parents had been divorced, and my father was an artist, so we said, Pop would really like it here. So the three of us came up. I know it was after the big flood. Was the big flood 64 or 65 when the redwood trees on 128 got that watermark? That's when the big flood on 128 was. And we came up after that because we saw the watermark, the high watermark. And it was foggy, and it was typical Mendocino, and my father loved it. And we ended up buying a house on the end of Little Lake Street, 405 Little Lake Street. And I remember we went to the Seagull, the three of us. We had hot apple pie. The Seagull, I miss the Seagull so much. I wish we could just buy that building and recreate it. It was such a wonderful place. And so, my father said to us, well, I can continue to help you with college, or I could buy the house. Which will it be? And my sister and I looked at each other. It was like, well, let's see. Help with college. We were both working and supporting ourselves. Meant sort of an occasional $25 check. We said the house. The house. So we got the house for $500 down, and I think it's like it's been, of course, really fixed up since then. It looked like an Andrew Wyeth painting when we had it, and my father never wanted to paint it. He liked it that way, just on the edge of Heiser Field. And I used to have a yarn basket filled with all different colors of yarn that I could get at Sprouse Reeds in Fort Bragg, Aunt Lydia's rug yarn, and I would make hats depending on what colors I saw out the kitchen window, and I pull those colors together and make hats. Anyway, so he moved here and got a job at the Mendocino Beacon, and which he loved, walking around selling ads, and the Pie Wacket was there at that time, and I loved going to the Pie Wacket. It was very communal. That's where you'd meet people came out from the land and from the towns and exchange news, and Maeve and Larry had that place and would make lumpy dumps, and so you could get a cup of coffee and a lumpy dump and sit at the big communal table, exchange news with people, go for your walks. I mean, in those days, there were only parking places taken up on something like Labor Day or Christmas. There was just no traffic. There were no tourists, and it was just so wonderful. Well, I gave the first concert ever at the Seagull Cellar when the cellar was in the cellar before it was upstairs, so before the fire. And that was with Christopher Tree. I think that was 68, just before we went off to New York. And Bob Ayers was at that concert. And if I could ever find the CD that the Kelly House made, we had a kind of Bob Ayers get together at the Kelly House once. it was during the years I was teaching in Berkeley, and I came up for that, and it was people who'd known Bob, and Bob was there, and they wanted us all to tell stories of Bob Ayers and how we knew him. And Bob Ayers loved to tell that story of how he met me, and he always would tell that story insisting that I was levitating. I was playing the koto, and the percussion instruments were going, and I don't know, but it was always kind of like a fun thing when he would tell that story. And when I came back from New York and the Woodstock Festival and got married, where next door to Mendoza's, where it's Patterson's pub, there used to be a little Justice of the Peace, so we got married there. That was legal wedding. We'd actually had a big Floating Lotus Magic Opera Company kind of wedding on Mount Tamalpais before that. We used to play at John Bretton Storm's soup kitchen. What did he call it? Oh, not the Sip and Sup. That came later. But John Bretton Storm, who had been a silent film actor, is what I was told, had the soup kitchen across from where the Pie Wacket was, which has now been overtaken by the hotel as extra rooms. But there he served delicious soup and salad, and he would sit on a kind of podium or stage he had spotlights on him and stage makeup, and he would preside over the diners while we played music. And and it was very unusual and very, very nice. Sometime during those days too, I remember doing a duo concert with Mickie Zekeley, because Mickie and I had met in Berkeley because he was part of the Golden Toad, and I was part of the Floating Lotus. And, so we didn't ever really play together, but we were in, compatible groups of musicians. And plus I was also in the New Age, so I wasn't playing with the New Age, I was playing with the Floating Lotus. Anyway, we did something together at Preston Hall. I don't quite remember what or much about it, but I just remember that it happened. To this day, I'm in the English country dance band that he started with Tim O'Loughlin and David Brown and people that are still around. I'm the piano player in Take a Dance, and we rehearse on Sundays at his studio. We still go up to where Beth lives, and we can practice there. It's now a 6-piece band. At the point where I joined it, seemed like about 20 people, and I think the world's largest English country dance band. And we're still pretty big for an English country dance band. Usually there's like about 3 people, or at least in Berkeley. Anyway, so we play for the dances at Casper Community Center, and it's really a lovely group, wonderful musicians, and I like the music. And then I also still play in the Bob Ayers big band, where I had a rehearsal last night. And David Brown is conducting that now, and it's always going to be the Bob Ayers big band, and it's just wonderful. And then I play in the symphony. So in the big band I play saxophone, and in the symphony, where I was a charter member when it started early in the 80s with Tyler Lincoln as conductor. I play viola in that. I'm just recovering from a great weekend of concerts and rehearsals. Oh, I love to play music. I love to play music. And I didn't tell you about the time that I collaborated with Fred Raulston. That was great. I wish we had tapes of that. We just didn't think that way in those days, or I didn't, you know. That was when I came back here in 1980 with my 4 little children, and Michael, who owned Braxton's coffee shop in Fort Bragg, where I would go with my 4 little children for my cafe latte, which I had to have. And he was so nice, he would put out a bowl of pickles for my kids because they all liked pickles. And he after hearing my story a little, and he knew Fred, so he arranged for us to meet. And Fred and I collaborated in what I think is some of the most beautiful music I've ever done in collaboration. I just, so Fred played, you know, he's a professional vibes and percussion player, crossover classical and jazz, and I had no jazz background at all, like 0. And of course a huge classical one, but we both were interested in, you know, Asian music and Balinese and Japanese and, you know, so we, Indian, and we started this group called the Now Ensemble, and it was with Richard Cooper on bass, acoustic bass, Fred on percussion, Marcia Sloan on cello, Virginia Cross on flute, and Ruva Shana on tablas, and then I played piano and koto. I'm not sure if I played viola or not. And it was sublime and beautiful music. We played original music, and we played at the Casper Inn and the Seagull Cellar when it was upstairs. And I just wish there were some tapes of that. I think he might have some. I have not been in touch with him, but I'm going to try. And then when that fell apart, because we really didn't make any money and people lived far away and it was hard to get, you know, to my place for rehearsals. So Fred and I became a duo, and we played, you know, I mean, koto and vibes, beautiful, sublime, just great. And so there's a couple of photographs that I wonder if Nick Wilson took, because I don't know who else would have, but that I found that are with the koto and vibes when we were playing somewhere on Navarro. Anyway.
Well, that's rich history.
Remember, I was a UC Berkeley dropout in the 60s, you know, and I didn't have any degrees, so I came back here. You know, my ex-husband and I had gone different ways. He, you know, was more interested in Sufism and kind of a different type of life, and he, I felt, became a different person, and I needed to get back to music and to Mendocino. And I came back here with my 4 children, and before Rachel, my youngest, could even walk, she wasn't even a year old yet. My oldest was 6. And yeah, and I realized, wow, okay, I'm back here, because we lived mostly in England and different places, and I said, I can't make a living as a musician. I mean, I was playing at the Sip and Sup Soup House for tips, which did not cover the cost of a babysitter, though I did get a lovely free meal, and also got to play the piano, and that's when I started developing these piano pieces, because I played classical, but then I started improvising and making my own pieces, which a lot of people who were here in the 80s and early 90s when I was doing concerts, solo piano, no, and that's what my CD is. But I thought, I cannot make a living this way. I can't even pay a babysitter this way. I can just do this because I love to do it. So I started taking classes at College of the Redwoods while I had the 4 kids in school, one class at a time. And I thought that I was at least a junior, but when I had someone analyze my transcripts from Berkeley, it was like they said, well, you haven't really taken many requirements. There's a lot of ceramics and folklore and, life drawing with Elmer Bischoff. Oh my God, that was so wonderful. There were such fine artists at Berkeley at the time. Anyway, and French, lots of French. Greek myths, yes, but no requirements. So one at a time I took classes at College of the Redwoods, which were great. They were really good classes. And finally, I think in 92, I got my AA. And then I started commuting to Sonoma State, which was really hard. 3 years with 4 kids in school. It was a 6-hour round trip. And I stayed on the dean's list the whole time. I took as many units as I could, 15 or 16, because I just didn't want to keep commuting like that. It wasn't like going down to College of the Redwoods. And I actually, it was really a hard 3 years, but I finally got everything done and got my BA. And then it's like, okay, well, now what? I still don't know how to be a gardener or a waitress, and I still can't support a family that way. I need something else. And I thought, well, maybe I could be a lawyer, but there was no law school up here. So I thought, then I thought I could be an art therapist. But I found out that was a couple of years of interning, which I could not afford to do. So I became a school teacher, and I commuted another 1.5 years to Dominican in Ukiah, and got my teaching credential. And then they said and I got to student teach with Dorothy Ayers and Millie Jensen, which was just really great. And then I did middle school with Jenny Otter, and so that was all really great. And I wanted to stay here, but I needed a job like immediately. And they said, the Dominican College had said, there's not many new teachers getting jobs these years, so if you're ever offered a job, take the first one you get. And so I went for what I thought was a practice interview in Santa Rosa, because I didn't even know how to interview. And the superintendent came running after me. There was, when I was going to get in my car and go, and he said, wait, don't go. We want to hire you. And I thought, well, this was just my practice interview. I really want to get back to Berkeley, but they said take the first job, so I did. And then the next year, I transferred to Berkeley. I got a job in Albany. And then when I was speaking for I was on the board of the California Arts Project, and someone from Berkeley Education Foundation happened to be at that board meeting and heard me talk about my views on the importance of the arts in public education, because I'd been president of MEFCA, that Dorothy Ayers and Mary Kraut and I and some other people had started, Mendocino Education Foundation for the Creative Arts. We started that to raise money for the visual and performing, 5 visual and performing arts in Mendocino schools, and we became a 501c3. And I really feel the importance of the arts in public education. It's essential. It's absolutely essential, and you have to do whatever you can to give this exposure and this practice and to children. So anyway, so she heard me speaking and followed me out to the parking lot and said, excuse me, but she introduced who she was, Mary Friedman from the Mendocino Education from Berkeley Education Foundation, and would you consider coming to Berkeley to teach? And I said, well, I have a really good job in Albany right now. I'm teaching 6th grade. And they said, well, we have a middle school that wants to turn into an arts magnet school. And I was like, oh my God, a school that wants to turn into an arts magnet school. I've got to go there. So I went there, and it didn't work because the staff, it didn't happen. That school did not turn into an arts magnet school, but I stayed in Berkeley Schools for 20 years and did my own arts integration.
Tell me a little bit about that. How did you introduce third graders to arts?
Well, you see, whatever your curriculum is, there's always, especially in history, there's always some art that people have done. So I would make projects based on that. Like when I was teaching 6th grade and teaching early civilizations and cave paintings. So I'd go to Trader Joe's and they'd give me like 20 brown paper bags that I'd cut up and scrunch up paper. There's different things that you can do, show films and then inspire the kids with the art that culture was making and have them do some things. And I would also, when we were studying Mesopotamia, I'd get clay and have them teach them how to make pinch pots, since I have a ceramics background, to make pinch pots, and I'd show them design motifs from that period and put things on. We did some cuneiform lessons and could write our names in cuneiform on clay tablets. And because when you study Gilgamesh in 6th grade, then so I would just tie these things all in, and then I'd put it up in the hallways. So the county superintendent, the Alameda County superintendent, used to send visitors to my 6th grade classroom because of the arts integration going on there. I'd play music from different cultures, as I was studying different cultures, and get a CD of the music up there. And then when I went to 3rd grade, we did a lot of Native American, the Ohlone Indians, just doing whatever I could. And then I developed my own art thing using the arabesque designs and geometric patterns, and teaching kids how to sequence with colors and just about color. And we'd have, at the end of a cycle of a pattern, I'd start them with really easy ones, and we'd go through the year to more and more complex things. And then we'd have what I call art gallery, and I would teach them how to critique politely. We'd put everyone's work on the board, and then I had a magic pointer, a sparkly stick of some kind. And people were so respectful and so polite. And I say, well, you get to choose up to 3 and make comments on them, what you see in that and what you observe and what you like. To be able to look at things and to make comments about them. And then, of course, we had this singing, a lot of singing, and I always played classical or Baroque music in the classroom. No vocal. Just instrumental music.
You yourself playing, or?
No, I had carefully selected CDs that I kept in the classroom, so that when they entered the room in the morning and coming back, breathless from recess and coming back from lunch, they always came into a room where classical or Baroque music, instrumental music was playing. And then, and if we had silent reading time, then I would just turn down the volume, but keep that going, and introduce them to conducting, what conducting in 3 looks like, what conducting in 4 looks like, and then when Eric Hoffman would come and we'd do our folk dancing 6 weeks, he would end with bringing a lot of, because he would play the Jew's harp for them, and they'd be fascinated by that. So he'd bring a bunch that students could buy. And then I'd have times I taught them how to make vowel sounds on the Jew's harp, and we'd all get them out and go A-E-I-O-U, you know, like just have fun things with music. And I played the piano for the school assemblies, so I would play music as they entered and music as they exited. And then because we started a third grade chorus, and so I would teach songs to the whole third grade, and we would do assemblies, and then everybody in the school would end up learning some of these songs, so the whole school could sing together, you know, and it was just really nice. Those are good memories. Actually, that's one of the things that made me sad about moving from Berkeley back to here. I mean, I loved coming back here, but I didn't get a chance to be in Berkeley and watch my students grow up and be there. Though I know that I have 2 grandsons in Berkeley schools. They're just beautiful people. And I was looking on Facebook one day and I saw a picture of my grandson's debate team. He's in high school at Berkeley High, and they won something, you know, in this big, huge ethics debate on Zoom with like schools from all over. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's Arushi. That was one of my third grade students who's now in high school, and my grandson and Arushi are on the same debate team, and that made me really happy. And then in the music festival a couple of years ago, one of I had such great students. One of my former students was one of the cellists in the orchestra, and his mom and I had went to the bakery and had lunch together. It was just really great to see him. And then another student showed up with their parents around music festival time. So those are the only times I've had, but I'd love to have to see more of my students, you know. There's one that I had in Santa Rosa who I'm friends with her mom, and she's been a professor at Harvard. And, you know, so I get to follow a little bit of what she's doing, you know. But I'd really love to know what happened to my students, because you really do care about them, you know.
So what year did you stop teaching?
2017. I was teaching in Berkeley Elementary School, and I declined the offer of a job to be the district music teacher because it was an itinerant job, and just carrying supplies in a car and dealing with traffic and going from school to school and parking. So I taught general ed in 6th grade and 3rd grade, and I loved both of those grades, and always, every single year for 20 years, managed to have an acoustic piano in my classroom. And I had designed a singing program for kids, even though that wasn't my job, you know. I mean, it wasn't a requirement for me. We were the singing class. We always sang. It was part of our day, part of our week. And then I started this folk dancing grant for 3rd graders. And that's how I was able to hire Eric Hoffman to come in for 6 weeks every year. There were 3 3rd grade classes, and I wanted to include them all so that there wasn't this division from one classroom to another, that we could be a community and, you know, people learn to dance with each other. And it was really beautiful. I think it was all the things that weren't part of my job description were my favorite things to do, the programs that I originated, which was singing and folk dancing and teaching cursive and I had this kind of art thing going through my curriculum of geometric arabesque patterns and teaching the kids about color and sequencing and patterns, and we'd I just developed into a whole thing. So on top of the math, science, history, reading, I integrated the arts into it because that's part of my belief, that the arts are a fundamental part of children's education and of our society, and we can't lose that. Well, I am so. My journey started in New York. I was born in New York, where my parents were born, and my parents were both very musical, and they were folk dancers and musicians. They both played the piano. My father used to walk around the house playing his Hohner accordion. He had a guitar. He was left-handed, so he strung it backwards. And so music was just always part of my life. And then we moved to Palo Alto when I was 8. And I'm so grateful for the public education I had there because I was able to start music lessons right away. And it sort of took me on an odyssey of instruments because when I started in 3rd grade, but then they moved me to 4th grade in the middle of the year, and which I kind of wish they hadn't, but they did. But the good part is then they said, okay, now you can have a musical instrument. So what would you like? And I said, oh, a flute. And they said, oh, well, we don't have any more flutes, but here's a violin. So I started violin when I was 8, and by the time I got into junior high school, I begged Mr. Nichols, our wonderful band and orchestra teacher, I really want to play the flute. Please, could I play the flute? I wanted to join the band, and, he said, I don't need any more flute players. And he said, but I could use a clarinet player. I said, okay. So I got a clarinet, and my mother didn't want me to play it because I was already playing piano at home. That was a given. That was, I from the time I was 8, I just had to learn to play this piece that Leopold Mozart had written for his son when, this little sonatina. I still have it. I still play it. I made my grandchildren try to learn it, but it just made me so happy to play this piece, and I wanted to play it. So I always played piano at home. That's the through line. Always played piano. But school instruments were different. And anyway, so playing clarinet in the band led to playing bass clarinet, and to play that in Ravel's Pavane was just wonderful, really. And I loved playing music. Went into Coverly High School, and I played clarinet, but I still wanted to play the flute. And Mr. Peters said, I don't need any more flute players. But here, you can take one home and just play. So I got a tune-a-day book, played the flute, and switched to viola meanwhile, so that the absolute high point of my high school years was when Dr. Kuhn would come from Stanford, and we had an honor orchestra of musicians from Palo Alto High School and Coverly playing together, and that's when I got to play the viola in Mozart's 40th Symphony, and that was just an epiphany for me. That was like, and so I looked forward to, Tuesday afternoons because of that. Anyway, I did take the flute, and I taught myself to play flute. I never had a flute lesson, and I went to Cal and played viola in the symphony there while I was starting ceramics with Peter Vokas, and I had the opportunity to have a wonderful class when I was in high school at San Francisco Art Institute with Jim Melchert. So I was equally involved in ceramic art as well as music. And at some point, Pat Kilroy, who I had briefly met and talked about music with, had left Big Sur, was on his way to New York to make a record, and he stopped by Berkeley to find me on campus and said, I want you to come to New York with me and make a record together, and then we'll go around the world seeking out indigenous musicians, trading music with them, and acquiring musical instruments. Will you come with me? I said, well, that was kind of sudden, and I thought about it, and I had become really interested in ethnomusic and been told that they just didn't offer that at UC Berkeley, and I'd have to go to LA to study that. I did not want to go to LA. I was really interested in Japanese and Indian and Balinese music, and so I said, okay, I'll meet you. I have 6 weeks of the semester left. I'm going to take my finals, and then I'll meet you in New York. I got to New York, and I put my flute in my backpack because we were going to go hitchhiking through Europe and with a backpack, so a flute fit in my backpack. That's how I became a flute player, and that led me to 3 years of performing with the New Age Trio and Pat Kilroy, and we created music together. It was all original music, everything we did on both our albums. Well, everything we did together. The first album that he did was, half of it was blues, because that's what Electro really wanted. They weren't as interested in his newer stuff. And Stefan Grossman and Mark Silber and was it Artie Traum or Happy Traum? The younger Traum, Artie, I think, was on it. Just wonderful people backing him up. Now, I don't play blues. That's not my thing. But we started to play together on the music that we created, and we just worked as a duo, and we did, hitchhike through Europe and Morocco and did what he wanted to do, and went back to California where I got a grant to study koto and shakuhachi with some great master musicians, Koto Araki V on shakuhachi and Kaiji Yagi on koto. And meanwhile, Ali Akbar Khan had started, it's before he had the school in Marin, this is years before, and so Patrick was studying sarod with him, and our drummer was studying tabla. So the three of us lived in a cabin on top of Bear Creek Road. It had been an abandoned cabin. It had no electricity, no running water, old funky wood stove. But it was adjacent to a house that was called Shanti, which was part of an outgrowth of Esalen Institute, a meditation place. So they let us live there, and we lived there and just created music, played music, and then went and did gigs, Berkeley, San Francisco, Santa Cruz, Los Angeles. And then at some point, Warner Brothers heard us or found out about us and offered us the really big, juicy, good contract. The 2 or 3 album contract with a advance, and I just couldn't believe it. And we were playing our own music, and we'd gotten really good together. Since neither Patrick nor Jeffrey could read music, I learned to play with my eyes closed and just listen and play with them. So, that's what I call music in the world of eyes closed. And which was quite something for me, because I was, used to playing string quartets, symphonies, piano sonatas, but I loved it. So there we were in Burbank recording a major album. They said, we're going to make you the Peter, Paul, and Mary of the New Age. And because we were the reverse physical image, Peter, Paul, and Mary were 2 dark guys and a blonde chick. I was very dark, and they were very blonde and tan. So, and we had Bruce Langhorne backing us up on I forgot what the name of the drum that he played, Irish drum, Bodron, I think, and really great A&R people. It was a fantastic album. They let me get any instrument I wanted, so I had an Italian viola, a tambora, and of course my flute, but then I got an alto flute. They got me an alto flute. So one of my favorite tracks on our last album is called, I forgot what it's called, but I made it the name of the album, and it's where I'm playing flute. What is that album called? This album. This was the Warner Brothers album, but this cover was made in Switzerland. Everything's a long story, but what I made the title track All Around was, I think it's my favorite piece on the album, and I'm playing an alto flute, which I absolutely love to play. The album, we went for the last recording session, the drummer and I showed up, and we said, well, where's Patrick? We're just about finished here. And they said we sent him to a doctor, and he's been flown to UC Med Center in the terminal stage of Hodgkin's disease. So this album, actually, Warner Brothers canceled it. It didn't come out.
Oh.
It came out on 40 years later. Raymond Dumont called me. I had no idea who he was, but I was just so intrigued. I was a school teacher by then in Berkeley, and took the call, and he said, is this the Susan who played flute with the New Age? And I said, well, yes, but nobody's asked me that for 40 years, and nobody in the education world that I had transformed myself into Miss Archuletta, third grade teacher, knew about my musical past. I mean, I did play in a Baroque orchestra in Berkeley while I was teaching, and I did play in the Albany Jazz Band, but they didn't know about my 60s things. And it turned out that he's the owner of a small record company in Switzerland that specialized in lost and forgotten music of the 60s and early 70s. And he specialized in producing albums that hadn't been made before. And so he asked me, well, do you happen to have are there any tapes, and I told him about this album that had never been produced. Warner Brothers had given me as a kind of consolation prize after Patrick passed away that I had the reel-to-reel tapes of the sessions, but I'd never heard them, and the tapes were 40 years old. And I also had a whole bunch of photographs that Paul Kagan had taken that were photographs for the album. So he said, well, if you can get the tapes transferred successfully, I'll make the album. And so I went to Fantasy Records, which was, I was living in Berkeley at the time, so they were so nice. And I told them the story, and they said, well, we're really backed up with all these albums we're making for the Smithsonian. And I said, this has to happen by August. Anyway, they did a marvelous job of preserving the tapes. I mean, I just couldn't believe it. I'd never heard the album before, and they played it for me after they transferred it. And so then Raymond Dumont turned it into this album with that insert that I showed you, the booklet, which has, he said, well, can you write a story? He said, I require someone to write at least 3 pages of the story of the music. He said, can you do that? I said, sure, I can do that. I thought, 3 pages, that's nothing. And it ended up being like 20 pages that had to be edited down to whatever this booklet is. And so it's the story of the music and how it became, with some of the photographs, and then all these posters that they found from those days. So that was that.
when did Pat Kilroy pass
He
away?
died on Christmas of that year. I don't know if it was 67 or 68, but it was the same year as we made the album. So wait a minute. If I dropped out of Cal in January of 66, I actually don't know which year it was. But, you know, it was, yeah. And so from there, at that point, I didn't know what I was going to do because it seemed like we'd been together for 3 years just creating music and playing music and performing music, and I'd never thought of going back to school. And it was the 60s. And I was sort of depressed, and then a friend called me up and he said, "Oh, you've got to get your flute and get in the car and come over here to Grace Cathedral. Something's happening." And I said, "Well, I'm too depressed. I'm just in my cottage. I can't. Half an hour later, because there was no traffic in those days, he arrived at my cottage door in Berkeley, said, "Get your flute, get in the car, we're going back to Grace Cathedral." And so there I had my flute, just point and click and just put me somewhere. And somebody says, "There's your mic." And I go, "Okay, what am I doing?" And it was Buckminster Fuller and some big dance thing in Owsley's Wall of Sound, and Don Buchla was there, and I had no idea who Don Buchla was at the time. I was just, you know, still grieving, and, you know, and they said, "Here's your mic." I put my flute together, and then over this shoulder there was someone who I actually talked to today, Bob Bassara, one of my oldest friends, a percussionist, playing Borneo gongs and bells and drums, and Don Buchla was adjusting the microphones. I didn't know who either of these people was, and I just closed my eyes and played with them. Went home and decided I had to get out of my depression, so I went on a 3-day carrot juice fast until the palms of my hands were turning kind of yellow-orange. There was a knock at my cottage door on the 3rd day, and it was Don Buchla and Bob Bassara. They said, "We've been looking for you and trying to find out who you are and where you lived, and here we are." Then they said, "Come to the studio and play music with us." So I said, "Okay, let me break my fast and I'll come." And so that started a long collaboration with Don Buchla of electroacoustic music. And I ended up bringing my koto to the studio and my flutes and viola, and he'd put it through the synthesizers, and Bob would be playing the gongs, and it was and I think KQE did a show of us once. So anyway, those were some exciting times. He was developing a theremin at the time, and then he designed an instrument for me that was called the Magic Flute. And as far as I know, it ended up in the Smithsonian. And yeah, it's a... And then I ended up sitting in on a rehearsal with a percussionist named Christopher Tree, who did concerts called Spontaneous Sound. Now, he had a truckload of gongs and temple bowls and, you know, drums and bamboo flutes and things, and he usually was a soloist, but after I sat in on him with this rehearsal, he asked me to collaborate with him. So I left the world of electroacoustic music and went into this very celestial kind of well, let me say that all of the musicians I collaborated with, none of them read music, and I was immersed in this other type of music, and it was not jazz, it was not classical, I don't know what category it was, but it was different, and somehow I could just close my eyes and play my instruments and adapt. And so we got a grant from the National Council of Churches and went to the East Coast, where they had us playing music in different churches in the late 60s. I think this was probably 68. So maybe Patrick died in 67. I just don't remember the years. But we did this very, the halls that we played in had to have natural acoustics, no microphones, nothing. And so these tones would blend, the flute tones and the clarinet and the viola and all would blend with the percussion instruments in the air. It was quite beautiful. That led us to being invited to perform at the Woodstock Festival. So there we were going to stay in New York longer. And at which point the man who became my husband, Graubard Archuletta, came out and joined us. And Conrad and I went to check out Lake Bethel, which was not Woodstock, but close enough. No cigar, though. Mm-hmm. And because I was a musician in waiting, and it was like 2 or 3 weeks before the festival, and Conrad was an artist, he got a job on the art crew, again through my friend Bob Bassara, who was the gong player with Don Buchla. And we were offered a cabin on the lake. And so this was great. All of a sudden I had an expense account, and I thought, wow, this is some kind of utopia. It was beautiful land, beautiful weather. In the art department, they were just painting signs and silk screening T-shirts with that little logo on it, and hats and whatnot, and more signs. And I thought, wow, I've never had an expense account before. This is real. Is this what making it is? And I'll tell you what I did with that expense account. We went out to Elfenbaum's Delicatessen down the road every day and had blintzes. I thought, this is living high. And this is really good. And then Christopher came with the instruments, and he was camped out on Hog Farm Hill. That's where the acoustic music venue was. This acoustic music. It was an adjacent hill to where the big stage was for the electric music. Well, it turned out that then the people arrived, and it wasn't so much fun anymore because it just was too crowded. The roads were just like a parking lot, and there were just too many people taking too many drugs, and it was not so utopian for me anymore because I wasn't into that. And, helicopters were flying in and out, flying out people, flying in people. Eventually the thunderstorms came and the clouds, and my friend Bob Bassara, who was staying out on Hog Farm Hill, told us that actually hepatitis was breaking out and the acoustic site was gone. It was rained out. And so we weren't going to play there. And he said they could only drink beer or bottled drinks because the water was no good. So Conrad and I got a forestry map and sort of slid out on dirt roads because all the roads were blocked in and out, and made our way to Poughkeepsie. And so that was my experience at the Woodstock Festival.
Wow.
But I finally got back to Mendocino.